Hello, welcome to Group 6's presentation. Throughout the class, we have focused on the origins of African countries and the transformation of them when meeting foreign influences that would bring trade, religion, and conflict. In our presentation, we explore Sierra Leone, its interactions with European powers, and the involvement in the slave trade, the illegal selling of slaves to Cuba via the Amistad, and those slaves being returned back home after the court case United States v. the Amistad. The two major populations of modern-day Sierra Leone are the Mende and the Temne people, of which the former is more involved with the Amistad. The Mende people are group-oriented with focus on lineage and community. Circumcision marks an entrance into adulthood in which they go outside the village to begin their education on responsibility and being a model citizen for the community. They care less about actual birthdays and instead participate in putting themselves in age groups that create lifelong bonds and identity with those within their age group. Another purpose of age groups is to facilitate labor for tasks which change as they get older. The younger Mende people participate in physical labor such as group farming, hunting, and warfare. The older Mende participate in what requires experience such as governmental and judicial affairs. Prior to foreign intervention, much of their history was kept through oral tradition. As descendants of the Mali Empire, the Mende people carried the Epic of Sundiata. In the 1400s, Portugal established a trade route in which they exchanged their gold, ivory works, and beeswax for goods like swords, household utensils, and clothes. As the plantation colonies in the Americas began to grow, so did slavery as a West African export. The scramble for Africa landed the British into West Africa, where they began to establish colonies. The abolition of the transatlantic slave trade in 1808 changed the slave market for Sierra Leone, who now relied so heavily on the slave trade. This only strengthened the bond between Sierra Leone and Cuba, who still persisted in the illegal slave trade. Also in 1808, we see the establishment of Freetown, now the capital of Sierra Leone. It is in this context of Sierra Leone and Cuba continuing their illegal slave trade in which we see the continuous bleeding of the country and where we begin to follow our ship.
The story of the ship La Amistad begins in February of 1839. Owned by a financier living in Spain, the objective was illicit in nature even for the time. The ship's captain and crew abducted hundreds of free Africans off the coast of modern-day Sierra Leone. Sailing back to Cuba, where at the time was a large slave trading hub, 53 of the Africans were then bought by two slave plantation owners named Pedro Montanez and Jose Ruiz. And their plan was to take them back to the United States. Several days into the journey, a slave named Joseph Cinque, who went by the African name of Sengue P, was able to unshackle himself and free his fellow captives. Arming themselves with knives, they fought the crew and were able to take command of the ship, killing its captain as well as the cook. They forced the plantation owners to sail back to Africa, but secretly at night, the two plantation owners would secretly steer the ship back towards the United States without the Africans knowing. On August 26th, the U.S. brig Washington came upon the Amistad and captured all remaining on the ship, including all the Africans and the remaining plantation owners, bringing them back to America, where the court system would handle them.
So the U.S. brig Washington found the Amistad ship that was anchored off New York, more specifically into Long Island. The slaves that were on board were put back in chains and then escorted to Connecticut, where they were later on be claimed on salvage rights to the ship and its human cargo. The 53 slaves on board were imprisoned to New Haven and were charged with murder and piracy. But these criminal charges were later dropped, but they still kept them in chains and locked up. While the courts were deciding their legal status since they were brought illegally overseas, their legal status since they were brought illegally overseas, on January of 1840, a judge in the U.S. District Court in Hartford ruled out that the Africans were captured, but indeed not Spanish enslaved people. But they all were legally captured and were all sent to Africa, Sierra Leone, immediately.
And then the people were organized based on lineage and secret societies. these secret societies had like different duties. For example, the Poro, which was initiating the boys to manhood, prepared them for their duties as grown adults, and Sunday, which initiated the girls into adulthood, preparing them to do female duties like motherhood, leaders of the society. Because like later on, we find that there were so many women who held chief duties in their societies. These were either voted by their societies or they were already born within the lineage of rulers. One of the most popular one was Madame Yoko, who even existed throughout the colonial rule, even though she lost her power because like during colonial rule, these female chiefs were perceived as puppets to the colonial rule. They still exercise their power, and they have entered registers of signing documentaries and signing documents and treaties of freedom with the British rule. The female chief was referred to as Dando Mahei, which is more of mother of the chiefland or mother of the land, and they participated in different duties as rituals and other political responsibilities. After the slaves were liberated, they settled in these societies, and many of them adopted to the norms, and others tried to retrace their origins. In their sources, Susan shows the database, which has like numbers of Africans, and in these registers they have a unique number that is assigned to them. Now these numbers had either like the slaves' origin, in this case is not origin in Africa, but the origin from where they've been liberated, let's say Brazil, Cuba, and so forth. And it also included the sex, height, and their names, respectively, those ones that are being given to them by their slavers or their original names. And we have some sources mentioning the liberated slaves like William Davis and William Tam, who later on, settling in Freetown, migrated south to Mende Society, where they also acted as interpreters for the British and other missionaries that were coming to the Mende Society, and they also continued trade. Now, slavery did not go extinct after its abolition. However, it was like restricted and wasn't permitted, but still slave traders were able to carry out in secret, and other economic activities continued on, like farming, hunting, given the origin of the Mende people.